for coming out. This has been really inspiring for me. It's been really, really nice to be in a space like this. I love community spaces. I love DIY aesthetic. I love the fact that people are doing things from the bottom up, and it's always inspiring. What I want to talk about tonight, I want to talk about beyond patriarchy, and really I want to talk about, I'm not going to talk about it in an academic sense, because I'm not an academic person, but I can relate stories about how I've been a perpetrator of patriarchy, and I've also been oppressed by the perpetrator of it. And talk about some of the ideas of how we can move beyond that and thinking about collective liberation. Because really, as anarchists and radicals, and people, marginalized people of all kinds, or anybody who's had the boot on their neck at any point, we really want collective liberation, and it's going to take all of us to do these things, right? And I have to admit, I talk a lot in a lot of places, and I have my standard talks that I do, and this is a little unusual for me, and I feel really vulnerable speaking. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, because it feels good to be vulnerable in this way. Because I think that patriarchy has really taught people like myself, male-identified, male-bodied people, to really stand up and strut our stuff, to be rock stars, to be the guys who talk in front and stuff. And actually, it's really nice to not be that, to not have that pressure as a person. And I didn't know Marie was going to do such an awesome job before me. I was going to talk about patriarchy and capitalism, how they are absolutely interlinked in civilization. But if you missed her talk, you missed it. But I just want to remind people that it's really important to remember that patriarchy, you cannot separate it from capitalism. Now that doesn't mean if we make capitalism fall that patriarchy is going to disappear, but we've got a better chance because everything within the capitalist economic system, the social system of capitalism, the cultural system of that, all reinforces patriarchy, right? And I think it's really important to think about that because for me, what I see in political movements a lot of times is that we try to separate the things. We try to go like a patriarchy is over here, capitalism's here, but this stuff is interlinked in civilization to a larger degree, right? The modern civilization that we live in, the alienating culture that we live in. And it reinforces individuality, it reinforces hierarchy, right? And violence. These things that we see regularly. I'm sorry, I have my notes with there. I'm not usually a note keeper. And I think it's really important to remember that just being against something, being against sexism, being against patriarchy, or recognizing those things doesn't change them, right? To say that, to take a stance against something only begins us on the journey of really changing it and transforming ourselves and transforming the systems around us in our communities. And that we really have to work on it, that it's step by step in doing this. And I think that that's really important. It's easy to make a patch, it's easy to make stencils, it's easy to wheat paste, to paint it, to talk about it in these anti-ways, but really it's much harder to actually practice these things, to nurture each other, to really grow as communities, to grow as individuals. It's much more challenging, much more difficult. I grew up in a working class poor, as a working class poor person. I grew up near the railroad tracks, on the wrong side of the railroad tracks. And there was a lot of violence in my life. And I know that I'm not the only person that ever had that. My dad was the bastard who called himself. My dad was a total shithead. He was a drug addict and alcoholic. We ended up doing 15 years in prison, but at the time he was still there. And he was beating my mom and beating me occasionally. And I grew up terrified of strong men, or what I perceived to be strong men. And I also learned to abhor violence, because anytime that you asserted yourself, it automatically meant violence. And it took me a long time to disentangle those things through readings of people like the Black Panther Party talking about self-defense, and then later through the Zapatistas, and then even groups that existed in the 60s like the Weather Underground talking about self-defense, armed self-defense. And something happened. I actually for a long time relied on the state, like so many of us, to if I saw domestic violence happening to somebody, I wanted to do something, but the only thing I knew was to get on the phone and call somebody with a gun, or call somebody who had state backing, in their world. And it felt disempowered because, again, dang it, Marie, shifted further apart. But like she said, like the cops don't know how to do that stuff. They fuck that stuff up. They're not mediators. They're not protectors. They're protectors of the state. They're protectors of private property. They're things that we understand about the police systems. But they don't solve domestic violence. And finally, in the mid-90s, this woman across the street from me, I lived in the barrio in East Dallas for almost 20 years, and this woman used to get beat up by her drunk boyfriends regularly, and one day I decided to do something about it. And I was terrified. I was terrified to do it. And this big hulking guy who was totally drunk, I went up there to him and calmly stopped him from beating her in the front yard, just really quickly, and I said, if you continue this, I will kill you. And I didn't yell at him. I didn't keep making threats to him. I just said, I want you to understand, I'm not going to raise my voice. I will kill you if you continue this. And I was shaking. I was about to pee my pants. I was so scared. But what it did was it was interesting because, you know what he did? Like, even though he was drunk, he was like, okay. And he just stopped beating her and he walked away. And he just walked down the street and he moved away. It was weird. And the people in my neighborhood, like, some of the people were clapping because the guy was such a loud drunk. And other people were like, why did you do that? Like, why did you? Because I told him I was going to go get this baseball bat. And I just said, look, I will beat you to death right here in your front yard. That was it. Now the thing is, I tell that story not in a machismo way, but because I felt I was at the final level of desperation and I didn't want to call the cops anymore because they kept coming and doing stuff and not doing anything, and that guy kept beating this friend of mine. And so I started to think about community self-defense, and then we started to think about it in our neighborhood. And so I started from there, and then as we did that, we started to gain more power. And when I talk about power, I talk about neighborhood power, right? Like, we were watching out for each other to make sure that things didn't happen to each other, that there wouldn't be sexual assaults, that people wouldn't be rowdy, too rowdy, whatever the things were. But we always had to walk this line between being too macho in this whole thing and really just like being vigilant, not vigilantes, but being vigilant in it. And it's something it's a tension that I've always struggled with in all the projects that I've gone into. But I think if we want to smash patriarchy and we want to smash capitalism, that these are the roots of the things of taking control of the hard, shitty, dirty work ourselves. That we have to do it in our communities. I think it's really important too to think about being kind to each other along the way too. Right? Because we've all been enculturated in these systems, in these various systems. I don't mean to speak for everybody, but I would assume most of us have been enculturated in these systems. Even if you're from other countries or whatever, you've been enculturated in these things where patriarchy exists at some root level. If you haven't, man, you've got a lot of things to show a lot of us, I think. Right? And I think it's really important to remember that we need to be kind to ourselves along the way in doing this, because we're all going to make mistakes. Even though I know better intellectually, even though I know better emotionally, I still struggle as a male in doing the things that I do. But one of the things that I've learned about was power sharing and working towards collective liberation is that I need to step back. There's two things to do in power sharing. One, recognizing first that somebody like myself has a lot of privilege, right? And when I say that, I don't, and it's on multiple levels, North American, white male, blah, 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 blah. We can go down the whole list, the political list, right? But recognizing there's a time to use my voice in support of marginalized communities, and you recognize that I have that privilege, and I don't feel guilty about it. I have it, I can use it. I can use it as a weapon all the time. And also times to step back and support other voices who have not had their lives reinforced to say, hey, you're a good speaker, you should stand up and talk about this, right? Because there's times when people that don't get a lot of airtime to do that. They don't get it over and over again. If I can call you out one more time. But the same fear that you have is a fear that I have every time I get up and speak. But I just don't vocalize it a lot of times because that's the part, like, I'm tough, I can do this, right? But it's a lot nicer to be able to go like, yeah, I'm scared too about this. And so, in moving towards collective liberation, it's about power sharing. So there's always that tension about what we're doing with it. right? So if you recognize that you have a lot of privilege, you have a lot of these skills, you have a lot of these things, make space and give support for other people to do that. It's not just women and women-identified people, but anybody, any quiet voice. Give them space and nurture them because it is super important. And you know what? You're going to get another chance to talk. You're going to get another chance to lead something. You're going to get another chance to be a jackass somewhere else. You know? Like, give space and give support for that. And not that denigrating support where you like say you sandwich it between a good thing and then a negative thing and a good thing. Support. Give support. Right? That doesn't mean being uncritical, but I mean don't try to take something away. And then one of the things I think that happens a lot in our communities is that we have these beautiful, amazing things. I call them our emergency hearts. It's the things that moved us to social justice. It's the things that awakened us, that said, what is oppression? What are these things that cause all these things? It's a beautiful thing. It makes us want to get in the streets. It's the thing that makes us smash windows. It's the main thing that makes us build community gardens. Our emergency hearts are beautiful. They're fantastic. But they can't rule our world. And everything that we do in political movements is not an emergency. I promise you that. Things like SB 1070 for immigration bills, the building of prisons, exploitation of women and marginalized communities all over the world, that shit's been going on for thousands of years, hundreds of years under colonial and now neoliberal policies, right? So although it feels new to you, or it may feel like you got to do something now, sometimes the best thing to do is nothing. And the reason I say that is because once we start getting our emergency hearts pumping and we start saying we have to do this, we have to do this, we have to do this, that's when patriarchy kicks in, because those with the most backing and the loudest voices end up at the top. That is not power sharing. So what I would say is slow down. Slow down. Because that way we open up spaces for all of us to share our voices, and we actually get to hear these things, and we get to have the debates and the conversations about stuff. So in any organizing, there is no, I promise you, unless it is life and death, nothing else matters. Unless it doesn't mean it's not important, but it doesn't matter at the expense of your community, of your organization, of ourselves. I mean, nobody else is going to build this for us. We are not going to wait for the great socialist system. We're not, and we see what capitalism has done, right? It is us, right? So we must take care of each other. And we talk about, when I'm talking about taking care of each other, and I want to move on from that, is like, I want to talk about manarchy. There's many people, myself included, who have a pretty damn good analysis about stuff. But that doesn't mean that we can't still exhibit bad behavior or that we don't make mistakes about things. But I think that anarchists in particular, that we need to be really careful, because that's largely the communities that we're talking about. I don't mean to speak for everybody, but what I'm assuming in this audience here. And that just because you're a good anarchist and you've read all the feminist literature, or you read all the crime thing that you could eat, or all of anything, you got great historical analysis, doesn't mean that you can't be an asshole. Right? And that you don't talk too much, that you are not supportive, that you never take over child care, right? That you assume that power sharing means that, well, you speak fast, so you must be the person to be in front of the media, right? No, it doesn't mean that. Leadership takes all kinds of skill sets, and power sharing takes all kinds of skill sets. The people who get up to speak a lot, like myself, if they're not washing the dishes, loading and unloading equipment, cleaning out the latrines, then they are fuckheads. You can quote me on that. Any of them, including Noam Chomsky. I don't care how many books he's written. If he is not taking out the garbage with everybody else, fuck him. You know what I mean? Like, it's all of us, right? Like, it's just because it's been reinforced that people like myself can get up and speak, doesn't mean that it's the most important fucking job, right? I think we need to remember that in power sharing and leadership, and being a manarchist in particular. So I'm going to talk about safe spaces for a second, in a much more broader sense. Marie covered a lot, and there was a great essay that you put together in there. It's really, really, really comprehensive. But I think that in creating safe spaces, what y'all are doing, you have childcare here. I see kids. I think that's great. A lot of spaces do not. They don't even think about it, right? Why is it that a lot of times anarchist circles are largely white, largely middle class, largely kidless, largely 20-year-olds? I mean, I'm speaking in very broad generalizations, obviously in this damn crowd, but I'm just saying, like, these are
usually those are the people that have the time to get together, because the rest of the time the other ones are working.
Yeah, but the thing is, I work with working class anarchists all the time who find time to get together, right? It's because they don't think about it, right? We don't think about like having kids at a space or doing things. And safe spaces is providing a space for kids. If we want to have intergenerationality, we got to have spaces for kids. And that doesn't mean that women or women-identified people are the ones who are the ones that are taking care of that. That means we all take turns in doing that. I always say, ATR, after the revolution, I want to do 3 jobs. 3 jobs. 1, I will take up a gun for armed self-defense. Absolutely, we'll do that. But I also will dig latrines and take out the garbage and take care of the kids. I love those 3 jobs. And I'm happy to do all of them because they're all important. And I think the other thing is, and I'm not preaching about morality or anything like that, but we need alcohol-free spaces, especially in DIY punk culture. It's really important to have alcohol-free. It's mixed around the country when I run into places. It's not because I'm against drinking, because I'd love to have a beer right now, right? But I'm just saying, like, I think it's important to have those because sometimes there are spaces where people just don't feel safe because we are damaged a lot of times from alcohol culture. Right? Doesn't mean that we have to be against it and abolitionist, but we need a mix of spaces to do those things. And then consent culture. I cannot talk about consent culture enough, and not just around sexuality, but about everything. We need a consent culture to learn to reimagine our power relationships with each other, but especially, specifically around sex. It's really important to get consent. And I'm not going to talk about these things in super crazy detail. I'm just going over the thing. But look into consent culture, and there's lots of people here that I'm sure that could talk about it. But I think it's really, really important. And then let's talk about problematic people again. So there's different kinds of people who are problematic in groups, right? Raise your hand if you've never had a problematic person in any group, any organization, or any event you've ever been at. That's what I thought. If you did, I'd like to know what island you live on by yourself. Because there's problematic people everywhere, right? We are damaged. We are not damaged like the Great Fall damage. We have all been damaged by patriarchy, capitalism, all these things that happen at different levels. And so we aren't taught to get along with each other very well. And so once we try to create communal spaces that are not based on individuality, it's really difficult for us to do that. And so what we need to do is like separate the 2 kinds of people. There's 2 kinds of behavioral problems. There's people who are learning and really want to change their behaviors that we have ingrained in us, and we should give them space to do that. Not be moralistic to them and self-serving and shitty to them. We should teach people and bring people along. I think that's really important. And then you have people who are problematic continually and aren't going to get it. They may absorb the language, but at every meeting they talk too much, they disrupt things, they just cause problems. Kick their ass out. We do not, in our small subcultures of any kind, of any of our communities, we do not owe it to everybody to try to take care of drug and alcohol problems, craziness, and issues that people have. I'm not even lumping those in one thing. I'm just saying we don't have to deal with that. The reason I am an anarchist, one of the big reasons, is because I believe in small groups that identify around what they want to identify around. And that doesn't mean a big tent. It actually means multiple boats heading towards common horizons so we can get there separately without interfering with each other. I think that's really important to think differently about. And, you know, like in my life, one of the people who I didn't kick out enough, obviously, was a man named Brandon Darby that y'all might have heard of. But what people don't know is before Common Ground, I would have nothing to do with that guy for years at a time because he was such a jerk. And we would kick him out because he was always on the margins of our communities. And for people who don't know, he turned out to be an FBI informant.
Asshole.
Yeah, did people know that? He was a jerk. But he was also a sexist fuckhead. And but when we'd call him out, and he would always like, I'm gonna make it better, blah, blah, and he would absorb the language of these things, but he would never change it. And what we should have done is just circled up and said, get the hell out. Done, done, and done. It would have saved 2 friends of mine going to prison, another friend of mine from being killed, or killing themselves, depending on who you believe about that story. And and a hell of a lot of less heartache on our movements. I take some responsibility for that. I can't not take it. I protected him in certain ways. And what I should have done is just gotten a posse of people and just said, you gotta go. Way before Common Ground existed in 2005. But that's the way life is, right? All right. So, and thinking about larger pictures, for anybody who's taking any notes on this, we know what we're against a lot. We're against patriarchy. We're against the consolidation of power with capital P's, cultural, social, political, and economic power. We know we're against civilization as we know it today, right? Because does anybody believe that what we're living in is totally sustainable? Because if you do, okay, all right. So we know we're against those things. But what are we for? Right? We need to think about those as individuals, as communities. What are we for? And start building for those. How do we build power-sharing relationships? How do we build relationships that are different than this? It starts with myself. I'm asking myself this, and then I start to build outward from that, and we build them safe spaces in our communities on these things. And don't moralize to each other. Look, we don't need level 5 vegans telling level 3 vegans that they're only level 3. It doesn't fucking help anybody, right? Don't be moralistic, because that is the old baggage of religion that we're carrying on our backs. Whether you're a spiritual person or not doesn't matter, but that's old-time patriarchal religion. Don't moralize. We can develop sets of ethics that we can all agree on in our communities that make sense to us. The other thing I would say is, remember to continue to connect the struggles. Marie talked a lot about that in the last piece. You should just get here and get the talk. It's like, remember to connect the struggles. It's really important. How does patriarchy manifest itself in prisons? How does it deal with animal liberation issues? I mean, they're very interconnected issues. Environmental issues. How do these things connect? Exploitation and oppression. How do they connect with each other? And connect those struggles. Not just abstractly, but we need to concretely connect them. And we need to shift the culture within our organizations, within our communities, and we also need to work on shifting culture and outward civil society. But first, shifting culture, which is the idea that all ideas start as a radical idea, and then culture starts to absorb them, and then they get sucked into mainstream, and then the laggards pick them up at some point. And when the laggards pick them up, that's when laws are enacted or economics tries to cash in on it. All ideas move that way. And it's called the diffusion of innovation, if anybody cares. And so the thing is, we want to shift culture. That's what we do as radicals. That's what we do as revolutionaries. That's what we do as anarchists, is we are shifting culture because we want, it is a culture war, and we are changing the way we do everything within our culture. We're not starting over, but we're trying to get bits from here and there and put it together, right, to build a new utopias. And so, in doing that, we need to shift the narratives that we tell ourselves. The old dead narratives don't work for us. So what is the new language? The language of hope, the language of trying, the language of not just being anti-something, but for something else. What does that language look like? And how do we shift it in the way that we think about things? Let's see. And then, what else do we need to do? Remember that, listen, what we are doing, what we are engaging in, what we want to engage in, is that they're uncharted paths. If we are looking at ourselves as more than voters and consumers, and we want to really shut this stuff off, we're going to be building the road by walking. Now, I didn't make that up, but it's a beautiful way to think about it. That and sometimes we're going to build roads and they're going to come to an end. And sometimes we're going to get on dirty paths and they're going to be fantastic. But it's experimentation and changing of our hearts and our ideas as we go. We will build the road by walking. And again, I want to say to ourselves that we must be kind to ourselves and kind to each other. It doesn't mean that we don't have conflict, because conflict can be healthy. Conflict can be important. That doesn't mean tearing each other down completely, but we must challenge ideas sometimes and recognize that we can be wrong about our ideas. I change ideas all the time. It's okay. It doesn't make me a bad person or a flip-flopper. It just means I'm real. That I'm willing to not be rigid about things. But I think it's really important for us to think about that we must be kind to ourselves. We are going to make mistakes along the way. That horrible things have happened to some of us, and that we must be forgiving. But be kind to each other too, even if you don't get along with each other. And then I will say the last thing is that I've been a political activist and organizer for about 25 years, and I see it a lot, and that we face burnout. We see self-defeat. We have a lot of language around those things. We must keep it sustainable. We must be sustainable as individuals. We must make our community sustainable. We must make our spaces sustainable. And I don't know what that looks like for every community, and I can't tell you what that is, but you must think about that. How do I do this for the long time? Because what's happened is that, like, I'm 46. When I first cut my teeth on stuff in my 20s, most of those people are gone. They're not even doing political work anymore. I've seen thousands of people go by the wayside. Tens of thousands of people go by the wayside. Where are they? I don't think that they're less political, but I see a lot of burnout. I see a lot of post-traumatic stress. I see a lot of things that happen to people. It's fun to face off with the cops the first few times, but after a while it starts to build on you. Those are not sustainable things. So what are the sustainable things? And you have to, as each of your communities will have to find that. I'm going to end it here with it. Don't give in and don't give up. Resist, rebel, create, and build. It's our futures, y'all. That's it. Questions?
What about comments?
Comments? I mean, yeah, of course.
As regards Chomsky taking out the garbage, the dude is 84.
Yeah, that's true.
If he wants to carry out like a
all right. Chomsky's on the list now.
Wash dishes.
That's language, new language to focus on, about focusing on synergistic and symbiotic relationships.
Love that.
Looking at synergy. How can you, because when we work together as a team, we can do so much more than if we try to work individually. And a symbiotic relationship is a relationship that benefits, mutually beneficial. Whereas a parasitic relationship means that somebody's feeding off the other. And really, when you look at relationships, they are either symbiotic or parasitic. And if it's parasitic, you gotta get it out.
Right on.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
I think that in concert with what you were talking about, one of the things that I was reflecting on in a conversation that I've had in many different times is a matter of community, because it is that, how do we have our little ship as we're heading towards the horizon, and everybody has their own, their own flavor, their own beat, and how they're heading to that in that direction. But in order to be able to build that synergistic energy and power among people, and be able to have it swell and thrive on its own, because it's a living thing that happens when people realize that they have to struggle together to be able to change the situation that they're in. And so what happens though is, and I get this from some people, is that, like, I can't handle those people, they're just different. Or, like, or the whole vegan piece, or, there's all of these different differences that we will tap into. And so maybe if you could talk a little bit about how to be able to, or ways to be able to question ourselves around, how do we find that that vulnerability that you addressed at the beginning, and being able to come out of our safe space, even if we're coming from a place of abuse and mistreatment and marginalization, and that we can be able to find that parallel, with another brother, another sister, another individual, that it may look very different, but it's the same capitalist, imperialist beast that's parasite, leeching our lives.
From my limited analysis of that is, one, there's no one community, and that we need to recognize that we're made up of multiple communities. Atomization through transportation and capitalism and all of those machinations have divided probably most of our families across geographic areas, as well as ourselves and our communities. So when I always look at, I never think I'm going into a community. It's a community, like the people here probably cross over in multiple communities. There's the hardcore community, the punk rock community, the vegan community. I don't even know what all the communities are, but you guys can label them all you want. And so that's one piece. The second thing is that communities are dynamic, right? So they come and go because of this transitory nature that we have. How many people here travel around the country a lot, like train hopping or go on protests and things like that? Yeah, it just creates a transitory thing, and like you may have a community in some town that it's not quite climate, but it's like, but like you may get to a community and you're part, like in Portland, Oregon, you're like, yeah, I'm part of this community while I'm here, but then when you're gone, you're back in San Antonio, and so you're part of that. You're part of some communities in there. So I think that's an important thing. The second thing is what I think about a lot is that we're trying to rebuild communities, or these communities in a way that we don't have any roadmaps for, and I think it's really difficult to do. Like the conservative elements want to go back to the good old days, which never really existed, right? The 40s and 50s, where they're like, it's like this family nucleus, and we all live in this one block together. But what I would challenge us to do is to look at communities way differently than we are doing now. That some communities can offend around the things that they want. That is that they can get together around the things that they want, or that they have affinity to. And so it might be religious groups, it might be ethnic enclaves, it can be multicultural ones, it could be around a bioregion. And then we start to look at these things differently, because the thing that I think the piece that we're all looking for is the alienation that capitalism has brought to us, and that we're trying to transcend it somehow, right? People have all these communities, but I think that we are still bringing baggage with us from what we used to think communities were, and that they're much more fluid than they used to be. And I think that maybe it's okay. Like I would love to have all my friends, my close friends, live in my neighborhood, and I get to see all the time. But I don't. So I have some of those people live in my neighborhood. Some of them don't live there, but I have other neighbors who I still have a community with, right? But I have other communities at my work, like my workplace. I mean, we're social animals. We have multiple levels at my work community. And so I think it's, I lost the train of thought. What was the second part of the question? Whatever. That was enough. I'll ramble on.
I said to be able to make yourself vulnerable and be able to transcend those labels.
Right. Oh, so we can process. Right.
Towards that
So the thing is, I think that's it's like developing a common language. I've been working with communities that I had been fearful of for a long time, just social libertarians who are coming out of the right trajectory, like people who had voted for Ron Paul and people who were in militias and stuff like that. I've been working with those people in Central Texas a lot lately. And it's been really interesting because, one, I start to find out that I have so many biases against them that were not true. And two, that they're more receptive to ideas than that. I think that we always want to create the sense of other, right? Like we're all wearing this color, so those other people are over that, or like we live in this geographic location. But I think that we just have to find the points of intersection. Where do we intersect? And the thing is, intersecting is like a strategic alliance, right? What's the common thing, the common goal that we're going for, that we can all get together, the symbiotic relationship that we can get together on. But a strategic alliance is different than a coalition, because a strategic alliance says once that goal is done, we separate because we are individuals, or not individuals, but we're individual organizations, different communities, and then we don't have to go down to the lowest common denominator. One of the things that we try to do a lot of times in communities is that if we're, like also as an anarchist, like anarchists, we have pretty clear sets of principles and ideas about things in different, like, and I'm sure they're variable, but let's just say we have a pretty clear set. And how many people have ever been in like larger groups of mostly radicals and liberals mostly, and had to kind of tone down the bottom level and get to the lowest common denominator of your beliefs, of your principles, of your ideas, of your ethics? Well, screw that. We don't have to do that. The thing is, it doesn't mean that we have to drive a hard line either, but we find a point of intersection where we can get together and we just separate. And the thing is, it's again in that boat analogy, if we're all going to the common horizon, the thing that is really important is not to sink the other person's boat. Not just an individual, but whatever, it could be a collective of people, it doesn't matter. The boats are just an analogy for any number of people that are trying to head towards common goals, and that we should be able to not sink each other's boat, even if I disagree with them. I don't like that they painted their boat black. I'm like, our boat's pink, and we like pink, and we think pink represents, and theirs is black, and we hate black. Well, you know what? That doesn't mean I need to sink their boat. Now, I know it's a silly version of it, but it's really true, because if you start breaking down what all the things that separate us, they're really bullshit things a lot of times. Now, I'm not talking about on the exploitative and oppressive end. I'm talking about just things like gang color affiliations, zip codes. I mean, that shit is all artificial, right? So where do we find the point of intersection? Anyway, I won't keep going on. Oh wow, 2 hands. You and then you. Okay.
I just wanted to address something, kind of going back to where you're talking about vegan points and stuff. It seems like a lot of in the radical community, if you address something that someone says, say a white person says some racist shit and you address it, or a male says some sexist shit and you address it.
Right.
It almost becomes like, usually the white or the male or something will try to argue with you why it's not sexist or why it's not racist, instead of just listening and trying to understand where the person's coming from, And on the other side, it goes both ways, it's not good to be like, you're a racist dick or anything like that.
Right, exactly.
And it breaks down to like two teams as opposed to growing together, you know what I mean?
Right.
And that's something that I feel like divides the community a lot.
There's a lot of tension in that. But the thing is, right, like, okay, so I'm going to make a giant assumption here about this group of people, is that we're trying. And if you're not trying, you get lumped in anyway. You're going to get points with everybody. You can come along and vote. But the thing is, when you're trying, it doesn't make us perfect individuals, and it doesn't make us have a perfect analysis about these things. It just makes us people who are willing to give it a shot. And one of the things that happens is that we have a very small mirror of reflection. It's us. Largely. We don't actually cross over into a lot of communities outside of our group think in a lot of ways, and I would encourage people to do that, to talk to people who are not, if they aren't. And so when you do that, we turn in ourselves a lot easier, and we start to go like, well, that person is way too sexist, that person is way too racist, that person is way too classist, or whatever it is. But really, if you look comparative to other subculture communities and stuff, it's not. It doesn't make us perfect, but we're all struggling under this crazy big, terrible systems that we're fish in water trying to figure out how to get the hell out of the water. Is what I look at it like. Like, I want out. I don't want to fix the water, I want to get out of it, right? But it's hard to get out of it, right? So that's where it comes down to being kind to ourselves and being kind to each other along the way, like, because that's a vulnerability. I could be moralistic and go, look, you're fucking up and you're a total piece of shit. Well, where are you going to grow from that? Right? Or I can say, hey, hey brother, like I heard you say that, and I wanted to let you know it bothered me. Like I was affected by it. That's a different way to approach it, right? And I think there's always going to be this tension in those things. I mean, we're struggling. We're social animals. Also, where else do you get to practice this stuff? It's the same with consensus decisions or any cooperative sharing of any kind. You don't. Right? You go back to your exploitative job where you have a boss who treats you like shit, where you deal with the cops, where you deal with the people at the grocery store, like who, not the workers, but the people, like anywhere that you are, you don't get to practice any of this stuff. So we only get these small windows where we get to do these things, where we get to try to be the best people that we can to each other and to those around us.
I also have a question.
Is it really quick? Because I want to go to other people.
No, actually, go ahead.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, well, you kind of covered it on, like, before the last question a little bit, but I thought about it before you kind of addressed it, is I definitely think that, especially these days in our modern society, we are, like more into networks of people, we know people, but we don't have one community, but what interested me about like what you did with Common Ground, what they did with like Occupy Sandy and stuff is that, oftentimes we think of ourselves as, separate and apart from the larger society. We sort of try to have this network of people that we go to be like have a reprieve against the wider thing. But at the same time, I still feel like I should be reaching out to the people around me who maybe aren't as radical, aren't as and everything else. And like I guess what was your experience in like being a radical, having that approach, but doing something like Common Ground, which is, for the wider community, essentially, right?
It was a fucking train wreck. That's what it was.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the fact, think about this. The fact that I'm standing here talking to you about Common Ground when there's 36,000 people who came to that organization, probably more than half were women. We should think about that. Or the fact that Common Ground was just one organization of thousands of organizations that were there, probably one of the most effective in its own crappy way, but one of the most effective organizations. I'm not going to take that away. We really did a lot of good work. But why people from New Orleans aren't here talking, right? I mean, these are all the perpetuations of these things. And so I think that we struggled, like in some communities. One of the things that we did at Common Ground was we took what the Zapatistas did. We led by obeying, led by asking. And so we go into communities, we go in and talk to individuals, and we just say, what do you need? How do we help you? How do we help you build your political power? How do we help you build yourself back up from the grassroots? Because our idea was to rebuild civil society infrastructure. right? To create health clinics where they had never existed, or to rebuild health clinics that had never that had caved in, and all the other things that just the basic functions of civil society, childcare, dealing with elderly people, medical stuff, jobs, these basic things. And so we would just go into the communities and ask them. So sometimes that was very successful because we could create really good dialogues and be led by community members. And other times it was a train wreck. It was a total train wreck, where it just we couldn't do this. And also because Common Ground Collective as an organization was so amorphous, like anybody could be a part of it. You didn't have to sign a membership to come in. You just said, hey, I'm going to do this, and you showed up and you started doing it. It was problematic in certain ways, right? So like sometimes good people came through and sometimes not so good people came through. So there is no right answer to that, and that's actually a long dissection. I could go on to that whole thing. But two basic things is that we went to each community to ask, and I think asking is the revolutionary way. Instead of 1, 2, 3 steps to revolution, to go like, how do we do these things? What is it that we're not doing correctly, or what not correctly? What is it that we can do differently? Like those questions are important questions to really change, not radically, but to revolutionize our thinking about stuff. And then the other part of it was to recognize that it was communities of communities. Like I took that analysis with me to there, so we made sure that it wasn't one size fits all for everybody. Some people needed community self-defense, someone needed medical, some of them needed tree service or whatever it was. We did different things for different things. Anybody else?
I have a question real quick.
Yes.
Do you have any tips on how to deal with burnout?
Yes. Stop doing things. You have to withdraw, and you just have to take care of yourself. The other thing before you get to the burnout is that you have to say no, right? Like no matter how much we want to upend capitalism, no matter how much we want to upend patriarchy, any of the isms in the large list of things that we want to do, they're not going to fall tomorrow. Even if civil society collapsed tomorrow, we woke up tomorrow and there's some cataclysmic thing that happened, these issues are still going to be with us, right? So we have, I think, taking a long-term view is one of, and it's harder, like it's actually gotten easier, even though I think I'm going to die sooner, the older I've gotten to think about that, like the long-term view of things. And like, again, from the Zapatistas, I mean, they're taking the view of hundreds of years of what they want to do to make change, right? Like intergenerational change. The same with the anarchists in Spain in the 1800s, knew that there was going to be a revolution. They didn't know when it was going to be, but they started building for it. And so when the fascists took over in 1933, they were ready. They were ready. They ideologically and structurally, they were ready for this thing. Now, things happened because the communists sold them out and all this stuff, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, you know what I'm saying? So like, we need to think longer term, right? And for those who think that civil society is going to collapse tomorrow in the apocalypse, I've got a bridge to sell you. Because it's not. Cataclysm never looks like you think it's going to look. And so don't make plans for the world ending tomorrow. Make plans like the world's going to be here for a long time, and how are we going to make it better for ourselves and for those around us. So I'm going to end it with this. We're standing on the edge of potential. So how's it going to look? Thank you so much, y'all. I love this conversation. It's way more intriguing than trying to figure out what we're going to, the next protest we're going to do. Who gives a shit?
Yeah, like, just let go.
Right. Actually, it's in my neighborhood, so it's a variety of
I'm actually going to bum somebody out my friend to get that DVD. But, yeah, I'm interested.
You guys are so heard of Hernan Cavazos? He used to play in a hardcore band in the early...
What was the name of the band?
I can't fucking remember. He's from Barcelona. But they toured